Welcome to this episode of What Matters. You're here today with me, Erica Elita, and
Andrew Blackwood.
And today we are going further into our ongoing topic of forgiveness and self-discovery. And today we're going to be talking a bit about generational patterns.
Mm-hmm.
Now, some people have heard of this as generational curses.
Right.
And I know that people have very strong feelings about that. Either it's completely ridiculous,
yes,
or there's something to it. So we're not going to talk about curses today. We'll speak about patterns and generational trauma. Some other things that we're going to touch on as well is communication, how it heals and how it can harm as well.
Right.
And especially what we don't say and what we internalize. And then, of course, in the last part, we'll bring it all back to forgiveness and how we can address kind of historical trauma and things that are continuously happening and are coming from a prior generation but are affecting us today. And how do you address that when something's kind of long-standing and you kind of walked into it when you were born? So it's
right.
a bit hard to change how people do these things. So if you have any questions, Anisha is here. She's very, very quick on reading all of your comments. So if you do have a question, please feel free to pop on. And so let's begin with the concept of generational trauma and generational patterns. So let's first start with generational patterns. And actually, no, sorry, the trauma. And you had mentioned something in your note to me. You'd said that it is not an African-American thing or a Jewish thing, or it crosses all cultures,
right.
all races, all generations, right?
Right. Trauma is trauma. Hurt is hurt. And I've been doing this work for many years, over 13 years now, and I've had the privilege of meeting with people from all different walks of life. Some are Christians, some are believers, some are not. The youngest person I've met with was about 8 years old, and the oldest person I've met with was 70-something.
Okay.
All different races, and hurt is everywhere. Now, I don't want to minimize the historical context that many people come from, specific people, people of my nationality, Caribbean descent, African descent. Don't want to minimize that, but sometimes we can get so locked into our own experience that we move away from opportunities for change because we get stuck with the bad parts of the story, the hurtful parts of the story. So when I think about generational trauma, depending on who I'm talking to, it will inform what lens I use.
Right.
Now, because most of the people I work with, they haven't studied as much as I was required to study in family systems thinking, so I don't really go back as many generations because there's not a lot of time for that. Mm-hmm. But if you sit down and kind of plot out what has happened across the years of your family, you'll be surprised to see how many times things will repeat themselves. I use myself for an example because confidentiality. I don't want somebody out there to think that I'm telling their
He's talking
story,
about me.
right? So the patterns are striking. Both of my parents are one of 7 children.
Okay.
And then you go up another generation, and they're the same number on both sides. It's 11. And then you go up the same, and it's the same number. It's really kind of freaky. But then when you look at certain things, you see genetically certain things that happen, whether it's a certain number of people died of cancer, or you see divorce happening on certain sides of the family, and it's kind of a ripple effect. And those are some of the things that you can't really hide. But when I took advantage of the opportunity, whether it was an assignment in my master's program or again in a course in my doctoral program, to go and interview people and ask them questions, it reveals a whole lot more. You know, the uncle or the family member who distanced themselves or was, the black sheep or the person who is the crazy uncle or those kinds of things. There are stories around that. And if we don't become aware of those stories, it doesn't mean that we are free of the impact of those stories because they still inform all of those people and their relationships, and the way that they relate to each other gets passed down to the next generation, to the next generation.
So with this now, you have the theory of nature versus nurture. Now this is in most things. So generational trauma. Now, I guess on one side we can say that it's passed on through the words that are spoken and the actions that are taken and the way people treat each other, and we mimic the behavior of others, right? As children, we mimic the behaviors of the adults around us, so it's passed down like that. But then people speak of remembering hurt, not mentally, but in other parts of their body. That, for example, like you said, I've been told, for example, I have the same mannerisms of a great aunt I've never met, or the same attitude, the same outlook on life as an ancestor that I've never met, I never had contact with. So I think that, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, there's a bit of genetics, actually what is genetically passed down in your DNA, but then there's also the nurture factor in how we raise our children, how we communicate with them, how we speak to them. So things like that are, like you said, you can't hide, like the same number of siblings or the same number of offspring. But then that, you would say, well, that isn't controlled by nature, because how do you decide how many kids the next generation would have?
Right.
But then something like cancer in your family, that would be passed down through the DNA. But an attitude, like you said, that crazy uncle who it may not necessarily be a diagnosed disease like schizophrenia or something, but just someone who has a completely different outlook on life, that black sheep family member that pops up every generation. Right. From someone else's child.
Right. Or it might be schizophrenia that wasn't diagnosed because that's not the language that they use. That's not the experience they come from.
Okay.
So there are all these ins and outs to it. And I'm a spiritual person. I'm a believer. Sometimes I believe in Christ. Sometimes I hesitate to say that because it can scare some people off. And they start to think, they know what you're going to say before you say it. But there are some things that I still don't fully understand, but I'm aware of them. And my desire for myself personally is always to increase my understanding of those things. So whether we're talking about a spiritual thing, a genetic thing, or a relational dynamic, it's important to do our best to understand it. So I think and I see things pass from one generation to the next. And again, sometimes we don't know that they're happening, but they're just part of our environment. I like to think about it this way. My brother and I have one brother.
Okay.
And people who haven't met us, if they were to hear us over the phone, they might not be able to tell the difference because the way that we talk is similar. Did we plan that?
No.
No, we grew up in the same environment. So what we heard became a part of how we spoke and those kinds of things. We don't really think about those things, but one thing can get passed down from one generation to the next to the next. So when I'm thinking about trauma, most people think about physical wounds when you talk about
Right.
trauma,
That's what I was going to ask you. The types of generational trauma. If you could give us a few examples
right.
of what it would be.
So, and I like the fact I use the term emotional injury when I go and I talk to people because it helps people to bring those two realities together. When we talk about physical trauma, people kind of they get it. They kind of perk up. But when we talk about emotional trauma or relational trauma, they don't really see it.
Right.
But an example would be staged migration, for example. I think I might have mentioned it
Yes.
one of the times earlier. That's an example that we could maybe even look back to slavery and see how it was institutionalized to separate the family and to deprive them of connecting and strong relational bonds. Then that comes back in stage migration. You see that kind of hurt, that distance between families, the lack of opportunity for men to connect with their families, to know what it's like to have a father who's always there, to be a father who's always there, to be present. So we're not raised in a culture, or it's not familiar, it's not part of our dynamic to know how to address the ins and outs. And I mean, a lot of people believe that, men are less emotional than women, but I like to believe we're just not as well versed.
In expressing that emotion.
Right, and in engaging with it. I mean, I have two daughters, and I know we'll come back to. We always talk about my daughters. They're wonderful, but I relish the opportunities to connect with them and to help them understand that even though I'm a man, I have emotions and I can understand yours, so that the next generation they'll expect the same.
That's their baseline, and that's where they're coming from. So when we come back from this break, I just want to touch on, we'll just give a few examples of generational trauma, but then we'll talk about generational patterns and how communication, how it can harm. And one of the things you had mentioned was how what we don't say has such an effect on who we become and what we internalize. So we'll be right back after this break.
Are you retiring smart? Make your home's equity work for you. With your home's equity in our 30 years of experience, the Retire Smart Properties team can help you achieve the quality of life you've always wanted. Our services are 360 degrees. We'll give you advice, take care of staging and selling, and help you find the perfect home and community to transition to. It's time to enjoy the retirement lifestyle you deserve. Visit our website today to learn how you can use your home to retire comfortably. The Retire Smart Properties team, powered by RE/MAX West.
Welcome back to this episode of What Matters. And this week we discuss generational trauma, generational patterns, communication, and forgiveness. And I'm here again this week with Coach Drew. Thank you for joining us. And he is giving us the lowdown on generational trauma. So we covered a bit of that in the first segment. And I wanted you to give a few more examples of what would be considered generational trauma. And well, I think saying how it gets passed down might be a bit too big, but give me another example of generational trauma.
So let's talk about an example where, in an environment where women are not treated well. Let's start there.
Okay.
And sexuality and sexual experiences, they're so kind of either mysterious,
they're shrouded,
forbidden, or so free-flowing that things aren't really taken, as seriously as they ought to be. A young girl is molested or raped. Those kinds of things aren't mentioned. They're not talked about. No help is sought. The next generation, it happens again and again and again. So it's interesting to see when it happens, what happens in the family.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes nothing is said. People know about it. They probably even know the perpetrator, but nothing is said. That's an example of generational trauma. And the things that happen within that person. So we talked a little bit about how communication and the lack of communication can impact people. Just think about what that is like for that girl who tries to say something and nothing is done about it. What are they left to conclude? That either it's my fault or it's not a big deal. It happens to everybody. Something's wrong with me. Sometimes those things are explicitly said to her.
Mm-hmm.
And then more powerful than what's said explicitly is the conclusion that she might come to for herself.
Right.
And that's typically how we internalize things. We repeat these messages that other people have said until we take them on for ourselves. So if she comes to the conclusion that, it doesn't matter, I'm insignificant.
Mm-hmm.
It really doesn't matter. Then what does she do with her life? What does she do with her
She
body?
behaves as though she doesn't
Right?
matter.
Then it doesn't matter. Then anybody could have access to this. She doesn't see herself as something valuable, something to be prized.
Mm-hmm.
Then people have access to her however they want. And then the larger community steps back and then they judge her. Mm-hmm. How could she do this? What's wrong with her? I think the question is a larger question. What happened? Right? Who didn't step in? Who didn't say something? So no man or woman is an island. It's important that we are actively addressing these things when they happen and seeking the support to deal with these things.
To deal with them. And something in the example that you gave, I can also see how this would go forward in the next generation and how this woman now would communicate with her own daughters mm-hmm. or her own sons. And, in believing that you're not very valuable because no one treated it like it was important when it happened, I know that in my culture, there's something you would hear said, advice given, girls reach puberty and the advice they're given are things like, don't sit in boys' laps. And that kind of solves, that's the wrap on that.
That's the whole deal.
Don't sit in their laps, and that's the whole deal. Or as soon as, a young girl starts to develop, she's villainized. Go kind of put that all away and cover up and don't be seen. And then her starting to feel like, okay, there must be something wrong with me that I need to hide and I need to be covered and, going forth and knowing that if you said something, no one would believe you because you see how much more your mother appears to value the opinions of men over the opinions of women and so forth and so on. So I can definitely see how that would continue as a generational trauma and continue to traumatize the coming generations. And then that could also become a pattern, right?
Definitely. And then if you think about it for the young boy who is socialized or conditioned that as much action as you can get, mm-hmm. that makes you even more of a man. So the earlier it starts, the better. Those kinds of things, whether they're explicit or not. Mm-hmm. Can you see how that could impact their interactions between the two? And they might even be in the same family, right? Which happens, but nobody talks about it. Right. Then it just moves from one generation to the next generation. To the next.
Absolutely.
And for the young boy who might not be developing at the same rate as another boy, what questions does that raise for himself? Mm-hmm. If I don't want this, then that means that I am gay. And then automatically that starts this process in his mind and questions. And
having to prove it, feeling like he has something he has to quote unquote prove. Absolutely. Right. But, on the flip side of that, are there not generational patterns that are positive? Are there not family systems that generation to generation enforce positive growth and positive interaction and a positive outcome?
Definitely. And that's one of the reasons why I like talking about the topic, not just to inform people, but to encourage people. Mm-hmm. We talk about legacies and those kinds of things that we can leave for our children, whether they're spiritual legacies or emotional or financially. Mm-hmm. We can give to our children for generations to generations. So, and it doesn't take much to, what I call it, is just change the dial. Mm-hmm. We grow up in these environments, and I see them like a climate. What you grow up in, that's what you're comfortable with. And believe it or not, whether it's healthy or not, you can be accustomed to that.
Yes.
So we can change the dial in our family dynamics degree by degree by degree over time. So, and you don't have to be child's father to be present, to be a contributing person in their life.
Absolutely.
One of the things that I encourage people to do is speak words of affirmation, and I could get into a
Yes,
deeper kind of level
I love
of it.
affirmations. I believe very, very strongly in them. Absolutely.
So okay, I'll just give it. I'll give it here. This is one of the things that I work with people on, and I call this deep appreciation.
Okay.
Now, like I was talking about before, when we talk to people and we say things to them, and we repeat them, anything we repeat long enough is likely to become a belief. So the more that we repeat these things is the more that people hear them and they internalize them. So just as you can say negative things or unpleasant things, you can say positive things. And when you speak to what you see in someone, it changes them.
Absolutely.
It really changes them. So when I look at my daughter and she's doing something, and I catch her in the act of doing something really wonderful, it is part of my internal dialogue or my role as a dad to say, okay, let's address this. Let's speak to this. So I would say something like, I see you helping your sister. I love that about you. You're so helpful.
Right.
Right? Or when she's doing something that is not ideal in that moment, like writing on, a piece of paper that I don't want her to write on. After I freak out a little bit, I come back to it and, I say, I love your creativity.
Let's just centralize it.
Exactly.
Right.
We reframe these things. So even when we're giving redirection to the next generation, we are in essence with our words hugging them and holding them and saying, you are somebody of value.
You're of value. You're of worth. Absolutely. And it's all the little things too. I'm a huge believer in affirmations. It will change your entire life. You can just change your whole existence with affirmations, yours and the people around you. But a lot of people think it's this huge thing. You have to say all the big ones, but it's something as simple as, another guest had brought this up, saying I'm clumsy. You trip, oh, I'm so clumsy. Everything you say, it was McKinney, everything you say after I am is an affirmation. So by repeating that, I'm so clumsy, I'm so awkward, it's a conversation that you're having, right, and you don't even realize how powerful it is. So even by, like you said, that's something I practice as a parent as well, and I try very hard, although, I'm too breaking patterns. Yeah. And so instead of, even though sometimes I will yell, stop writing on those papers, then, as you said, I'll come back and I'll say, I love the fact you draw so well. Look how great your birds are. But don't draw it on anything that has mommy's name on it.
Remember to ask first.
Yeah, let's ask first. But saying, your birds are getting even better. So it's all these little things and these tiny adjustments in becoming a better person. I always say this is a journey. It's a lifelong journey. It's something you work at every moment of every day. But changing those patterns, it starts with, as you were saying, realizing, finding out, what happened to Uncle John that nobody ever spoke about? Like, what was wrong with him?
Asking those questions.
Opening those doors. A lot of times in families, there is a lot of secrecy. Things are shrouded in secrecy. And the only way to know things about your family and about what's happening, why so-and-so acts like such and such, is to start to ask questions. And sometimes even by the reaction of people, you can start to see how big and how deep something goes just by, their willingness to share.
Exactly.
So I think that is a huge thing. So I had pulled out my phone because Andrew had written some great things to me. So when we come back from the break, we're going to speak about communication. And we spoke a little bit about how it can hurt, but also to how it can heal. And what we leave unsaid can be really, really important. That conversation that we have in our heads is everything into becoming who we are, but then also to the words that can heal and how we can heal and going forward in fixing things that are from our past, but trying to go forward. So when we come back from the break, we're going to touch on communication and how it heals and helps and how we can grow from it. We'll be back after this break. And we're back. Today we are discussing generational patterns, generational curses, generational trauma, communication, and forgiveness. And now we're going to be touching on, with Coach Drew, how words can heal. And there are a few phrases. He has these amazing phrases that I try to remember, but I'm not that swift just yet. But one of the things that you said, and I have to pull out my phone, you spoke about... where was it? The silent conclusions.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that would go under the harming part of words that we say and words that we don't say. So communication is the vehicle of all our relationships. So is that a good way to put it?
Sure, why
Okay.
not?
Yeah. So communication is the vehicle of all our relationships. And they say 80 or 90% of all human communication is nonverbal.
Upwards of 90.
Upwards of 90. So it's how we look at people and our tone and
Yes.
our body language and when we exhale and all
yeah.
of those things. That's what gives our life words and meanings to others. So there's the things that we say, directly say, you're a good child, I appreciate you, I love you, you're so stupid, you do everything wrong. Those are the words that we say.
Yeah.
But now that silent conclusion, is that not a gathering of all of the things that are not said?
Yes, it does work both ways. You know, we filter and we fill in, and we do this when we're not even aware, and it happens even when we're really, really young. Mm-hmm. I can even watch my daughter. Sometimes she'll get upset, and something has happened legitimately, and I could see why she's upset. But then she gets even more upset, and she'll stay upset. She's 5. So, I go up to her and I ask her, how you doing? What's going on in that head? And then I'll ask her something like, were you thinking that this is so unfair and that nobody likes you? She's like, yeah. That's exactly what she was thinking. Mm-hmm. And she could, if I left that unaddressed, she could actually believe that.
Right.
That nobody likes me idea. And, I've met with parents over the years, and their kids, 13, 14, 15, and sometimes even as early as 11, might be talking about self-harm and ending their lives. Mm-hmm. And it's because we miss some of those opportunities to address things that our children are thinking and experiencing, but there's this vacuum, there's silence, and they come to their own conclusions.
Right.
Now, am I advocating being mind readers? No, I'm just saying be vigilant, mm-hmm. be attentive, to ask questions, and come back and address some things. And I guess by virtue of what I do and how long I've been doing it, some kind of these things come a little bit more readily to me.
Right.
But I like teaching people how to do this. I think as a parent, it's so important that you're able to hear and listen for key words and watch for body language and put your theories out there. It's not that you have to be right. You don't have to be right. You can be wrong. Mm-hmm. You can ask a question. If they say, no, that's not what I'm thinking, then okay. Right. So really, what is going? So they get used to talking about it. And then another thing that parents try to do, myself included, because we love our kids, is we try to fix it for them.
Yes. Always trying to fix it.
Right. We try to fix it. We try to get into their brain and change those conclusions. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't work.
No, it does not.
I mean, after a certain period, they're not trying to believe what you're saying anymore. They know what they know, mm-hmm. But we get to come alongside. We move from parenting to protect, from parenting to prepare, and then parenting as partners. So we do that graduation, and the way that we do that is we get to ask them questions about those thoughts. But we can't ask questions about the thoughts if we never really hear what those thoughts are. Mm-hmm. So a simple question to kind of challenge those beliefs is, well, is it true you really think that nobody likes you? Like, absolutely nobody? What about Uncle Dwight? What about Auntie Lori? I mean, I was just upset with you, but does that mean I can't love you because I'm upset with you?
Right.
And she'll be like, well, no, not you. So you see opportunities again.
And showing them how to think. Like,
yes.
Analyze things.
To think.
Don't just be in your feelings. And your feelings are legitimate. Feelings are important. I have 3 kids. The last 2 are boys. And funny enough, I find that they are more emotional and more vocal about it. And it's something that I encourage them. I tell them, you're entitled to your feelings. You are always entitled to your feelings. You're not entitled to be rude to me. You're not entitled to be disrespectful. But even in that, sometimes I understand the frustration. And so things come out. And instead of telling them what I think they're thinking, you're doing this, I'll say, well, is this why you're doing this?
Yes.
Trying and making them think too, because my son, the drama king, because his mother's the drama queen, I went to school today and no one played with me. No one likes me. I
Nobody.
have no friends. And, I put on my helicopter parent hat and I want to go and make sure that,
He's
everything's
treated fairly
okay
at
and
school.
everything's. And then I stop and I say, wait a minute. No one likes you? You had like 8 friends yesterday and they all jumped ship? Well, no, 6 of them were still. Oh, so you have 6 friends that like you. Yeah, and then there are 3 people in another. Oh, so you're up to 9. And then as I'm adding this up for him, he's like, no, actually, a lot of people like me. And I say, yes. Now, the next time you're thinking that nobody likes you, maybe just stop and think about all the people that you did speak to today and you did have a good time with.
Exactly.
So teaching them how to think about things and how to process things and not just be in their feelings. So we can help with our words in affirming the positive that we see in them, even when it's presented in a negative situation.
Yeah.
I'm really glad that you stood up for that little girl, but you shouldn't hit other people. Something like that, where you that was great that you're kind and you're considerate, but
Right.
and we can deal with it this way. That, as you had said, that putting together of everything that's not said, or coming to a conclusion based on the little bits and pieces that you hear, is not just a child thing, it's an adult thing as well.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Right?
And we see it in ourselves. The more readily we can respond to ourselves in a particular way, that prepares us and enables us to do that well or better for the next generation. But if we're not aware of how we think and how we process or don't think, then that's what we're going to pass on.
Absolutely.
We focus so much on teaching our children how to behave, but we don't really focus on what comes before the behavior.
The thought.
Exactly. We teach them how to behave, but we don't teach them how to think. We try to teach them what to think and what to say, but not how to think.
Can I clap?
and
Am
how-
I allowed to do this?
Yeah, sure, I know. Let me clap too.
Yay!
And how to think and how to say things. So when my daughter, who's 5 going on 16, she's feeling all these emotions in her body, and she's reacting to them, and she doesn't know that this is a bad attitude. Okay. I could fly off the handle, right? Or I could help her understand. Okay, see that what you just did right there?
You can't do that.
The rolling of those eyes, that's what we call a bad attitude. I'm going to smile the first time. The next time it's not going to be funny.
Right.
Those kinds of things.
Yeah.
The point is, it's important that we're intentional about how we address things. And we help them understand what we're seeing and help them understand what they're feeling. And by no means are we to dictate what they're feeling and what they're supposed to feel, because that's another kind of generational pattern. Your child, this is what you're supposed to do, and this is what you're supposed to think, and this is what...
The bane of my existence.
But they're already demonstrating to you that they've surpassed that on some level and in some moments. It's confusing for a parent because sometimes they're 16 and sometimes they're 3.
Oh, yes.
Right? So it's an opportunity for us to kind of dial back and really be intentional about how we relate to people. In my work with people, I move from one level to the next to the next. There are 3 tiers that I'm constantly going up and around. The first one is awareness. I want to increase awareness. The second one is tolerance. We want to help people to be able to tolerate what they become aware of or what they're experiencing. And then lastly, we want to help people to be intentional. So even as young as my little one is, or little ones are, I want to help them kind of realize, okay, this is what I'm feeling. And when I'm feeling this is, I can handle this.
Yeah.
So all that frustration, all that anger, that led to you punching that kid in the face at school, it's not that the anger is bad, right? It's how you deal with
how you
right.
process it.
What options do you have when you feel that
The
angry?
thought before the action. And Anisha, I know you're going to wave at me in a second. We have to go to commercial, but there's a zillion things you said that I have so much to say, but that in that, and for the people out there who are not parents and are not raising children, you raise yourself every day. Every day we're growing up. So in every interaction you have your coworkers, your partner, your friends, and so forth, you have that opportunity to grow. When you're raising children, this opportunity is amplified and often too much for you to deal with at the time. But every every time that you are trying to teach them better, it is an opportunity for you to do better. And this is how you start to break those patterns.
Generational patterns.
That's how you break
One battle at a
generational
time.
patterns. It's
Yeah.
one battle at a time, and realizing that you're mimicking behavior or you're patterning negative behavior, being aware of it, addressing it, and then becoming intentional in behaving differently and thinking about it differently, and then you'll react differently. So I think that I know for myself in patterns I am actively trying to break, it was in recognizing, hey, this is what's going on, and how do I stop this, or how do I change this? So in every interaction that you have an opportunity to grow and do better and think. And that's why I really encourage people to sit through uncomfortable situations and conversations, and even people who may necessarily make you uncomfortable, and figure out why. Why does this make me uncomfortable? Why do I not like this? And it doesn't mean that you have to immerse yourself in everything that makes you uncomfortable, but one of the things you should examine is why. So when we come back from this last break, we're going to go into the forgiveness aspect. And, very interestingly, you touched on forgiving patterns that exist and forgiving behavior that already exists when you arrive on the scene. So I'd love to know about that, because I want to be able to do that too. So we'll see you after this break.
Are you retiring smart? Make your home's equity work for you. With your home's equity in our 30 years of experience, the Retire Smart Properties team can help you achieve the quality of life you've always wanted. Our services are 360 degrees. We'll give you advice, take care of staging and selling, and help you find the perfect home and community to transition to. It's time to enjoy the retirement lifestyle you deserve. Visit our website today to learn how you can use your home to retire comfortably. The Retire Smart Properties team, powered by RE/MAX West.
Welcome back to this last segment of generational curses, patterns, trauma, communication, forgiveness. I'm here with Coach Drew. We are talking about how to be aware of, to address, to change the patterns that you are currently involved in, whether you realize it or not. And now we spoke about what generational trauma is and patterns. And then we spoke a little bit about communication and how our words can heal or they can harm, and how what we don't say is as important as what we do say.
Right.
And now something that you had spoken about was how we address, how we forgive behavior that already exists. In the generation that has come before us, there's behavior, there are patterns. How do we, one, forgive this, especially when sometimes the person who's initiated this whole thing isn't even around to forgive, right?
Right.
And how do we address it? How do we in that frame of mind of forgiveness and moving forward and letting things go, so that we can grow as a family, leave our legacy, a positive emotional legacy, spiritual legacy, and I think that in some ways would tie into financial as well. How do we do that? So I've asked 7 million questions. You pick one and you answer. how?
Wow. I think it's always safe and powerful to start with ourselves. So the more aware of who you are, how you behave, and the things that you do that you're not happy with, when you start to address them in your own life, it will empower you to be able to address it with other people. So, I mean, I talk about it in the book, The Art of a Genuine Apology, which I have right here.
You gotta hold it up.
You know, and I actually use it. The most recent apology I offered was to my daughter, the 5-year-old, and I said, you know, I did get upset and I yelled, and I'm sorry. And I'm sorry because I didn't manage that well. Not remembering the precise words, but what the third step in the apology I think was most important. I actually gave time to think about what I would do differently the next time. Mm-hmm. And that's a part that a lot of people miss out. They're quick to tell themselves not to do something or tell other people what not to do, but we don't know what exactly it is that we want them to do. Mm-hmm. And that is key. When we engage with other people who are hurting us, it's one thing to say, just stop that. But if they've been doing this for generations, they don't know what else to do. It sounds simple, but it's really, really significant.
It is
they
huge,
do
yes.
it because most of the times they don't know better. And just because they might know it's wrong doesn't mean that they know how to do something better. Mm-hmm. It's woven into what they do for years. That uncle or that aunt who says just whatever comes to her mind.
Unfiltered.
Right? You know, she might call you a name. She might think it's cute because that's just, you know, she might say, what the way you look fat, eh? Fat and nice. Right? To her, that, you know, sometimes it's a compliment, other times
and
it's not.
other times it's a
right?
backhanded jab.
Right, exactly. You know, anyhow, we don't have time to get into all those examples. But the point I'm trying to make is the more comfortable we get with addressing things with ourselves, mm-hmm. we know that we can handle it. So then the extension is likely to be more true that the person can handle it. Right. Often we don't tell people, we're not assertive, we don't talk to people, we don't tell them honestly what we're thinking or feeling because we think the whole thing is going to pop off and everybody's, you know, dinner's going to be mashed up, yep. You know, turkey legs going to be, right? It's not that deep. It's not that deep. If they can dish it,
they can often take it. Yes,
often. And if they can't, then that's something to talk about, mm-hmm. right? So timing is important. Timing is important. If you have an issue with somebody, it's good to know when is the best time to address it. Mm-hmm. You don't want to wait till it's that big dinner and then just, you know, just raise it. But even before you raise it, let's talk about forgiveness. Okay, let's
go. Let's take a step back before we call out that miserable aunt who is constantly insulting you publicly. Let's go back to forgiveness and looking at maybe why for myself personally, recognizing that somebody else was so unhappy in their own life and hence why they were constantly attacking me, it actually switched the way I reacted to what they did. Instead of feeling angry and annoyed, it became more of a reaction of pity and like, you know what, you poor thing. You're really an unhappy person, and trying to and then addressing them more like that, taking the anger out.
Exactly. So part of forgiveness is doing that. Not only do we talk about really understanding how you've been impacted, that's where we start. What did I miss? What was going on for me? How did this wrong impact me? And I know you're going to talk about my friend who's going to join us next week. She's an expert about forgiveness, so she'll add to it. But the way I see it, it's like forgiveness is kind of like washing your face in the morning.
Okay.
You get up, you got stuff on your face. You don't want to go out in public with your face looking a mess, crust in your eye, you know, drool all over your face. And that's kind of what unforgiveness does to us. It makes us feel and behave in ways that's just really not ourselves. It's not presentable. It might be authentic, it might be true, it might be valid, but you get to wash your face before you go out and interact with other people. Brush your teeth, that kind of thing. Forgiveness is just like that. How am I going to come to you and I've got all this pent up stuff? Of course it's not going to go well.
No,
but if I'm
swinging,
right, yeah, breath hot, you know, I'm in your face with my stuff. I didn't brush my teeth, I didn't wash my face. So forgiveness is like that. You can think about it, okay, and cultivate that kind of empathy. Where did this come from? What are the possibilities? Okay, you know what? I'm okay. I can let this go. I'm okay. Mm-hmm. God's got me. I'm okay.
Yes.
I'm still gonna address it.
But I'm not in it like
I'm
that
not coming.
anymore.
I'm not coming guns cocked,
Yeah.
guns blazing. I'm gonna come to you and say, you know what? I've noticed that you have a habit of doing this. I don't know if you're aware of how this impacts me, but
Yeah.
this is what happens for me. And the person might take to it, they might not, but you're better able to address it, right? And we can talk a little bit about assertiveness and how that's woven into the experience of connecting with people.
Right.
And I know from one generation to the next, there are sometimes these rules and expectations that, you know, the elder people, they're always right. They can say whatever they want, whenever they want. And while I believe in respecting the generation that has come before and valuing them, I don't believe in letting them, you know, crap on your head because they want to. No, if you're behaving like you're 2 and you're 92, I'm going to tell you.
Yes, exactly. And respect does flow both ways. And that's something that, you know, I've explained to some of my elders that, you know, you just don't automatically get respect because you exist. There's behaviors that go with this respect that you've believed you've earned. And, you know, generationally, as you were saying, how times change and things change. And, you know, with me, I was raised, everything is yes, mom. There, you never say yes without a mom. She and I could be alone in a room. I say yes. She'll say, who are you talking to? And it's like, you're the only other person here. But she still wants the yes, mom. And so now with my kids, I do it more of a tone check sometimes. Like sometimes, yes, I'll be like, who are you talking to? Yes, mom. It changes. But I'm not a real stickler for it. You know, it doesn't have to be every single time. And my kids will go, my mother will call them and they'll say yes. And she's like, oh my goodness, the heathens you have raised.
Right.
Look how you dragged those children through a barn and brought them to my house. So there is the little differences and little subtleties that I tell them sometimes, you know, if it doesn't hurt you to help make your grandmother happy, do it. But if it really is a conflict with who you are and what you believe in and what you stand for, then it's time to respectfully say something, you know? And I think that's how we get the dialogue going over generations. Exactly. Where you're talking about grandparents to grandchildren and understanding that, you know, it may how we communicate may have changed, but there's still factors of respect you can put in there, and that change in attitude, it goes both ways and both generations can grow. And, you know, as you were saying, you know, being right with yourself, because when you come to rude Aunt Sue in anger, it's just gonna go bad.
Right.
It's just gonna go really, really bad.
And it's true that some people don't hear unless you speak in their language, so to speak. But we don't want to use that as the excuse to go and just behave the same way that they behave, because then we're.
Why is there Medea scenes running through my head right now?
The things we see are powerful. They stay with us. You know, so I really definitely believe in forgiveness. I definitely believe in taking responsibility for your action, and it opens up the channel of healing from this generation to the one that's come before and the one that's coming after us. I don't know if I mentioned this before, but I went through a process where I was talking to my grandparents about things that upset me or, you know, whatnot, and the next day my grandfather died.
Oh.
The next day. So for me, it was such an honor to be able to kind of work through that, for him to hear and for him to respond. And my grandmother's still around, and we had the conversation too. So we don't know how much time we have.
Yeah, have the conversations. Open the door.
Yeah, don't waste time holding on to stuff, keeping your face dirty, your heart polluted, and all that stuff. Wash your face, brush your teeth.
Show up.
Address things, and it makes things better. It's not a guarantee, but at least you can say, I've done this.
I've tried. I've put it on the table. Yeah. I've tried to make this interaction better. Now, before we go really quick, the next time you're back, we're having a special guest with our special guest. And tell us a little bit about what will be happening. I believe it is November 13th. Let me check.
I think so.
Yes, I think so too.
So my good friend, Dr. Joan, she is a forgiveness expert. I mean, she's pioneering this work that I think is really, really powerful. So while we might be familiar with the topic of forgiveness, it's so good to come from a different angle. So I'm looking forward to her kind of walking us through and kind of augmenting that discussion.
Absolutely. So that will be on November 13th. You will see us, the three of us here together. So it's a Dr. Joan Coach Drew and myself, Eric Halita. We will be back on June 13th. I'll be back before then, but June 13th is the next time that Coach Drew returns. Thank you so much for starting this with us and helping us understanding the art of a genuine apology, forgiveness, how it plays out in our lives, and how all of this work, and it's work, guys. It is work.
Sure is.
It's hard work and it's ugly work, but the results are beautiful and long-lasting and so worthwhile for you and your family. So thank you once again for joining us here on What Matters. I'm Eric Halita.
Coach Drew.
And we are so glad you joined us today. Send us any of your questions. All of our contact information is in the links. Thank you, Anisha, for being awesome as always. Have a good evening, guys.